42 seconds. That was all the time Marcus Sterling had left to live, though he had no way of knowing it. He was too preoccupied with the Patek Philippe watch strapped to his wrist, the one that had cost him $850,000, purchased to commemorate his first billion. The watch that now told him he was running
This section
8
needs
minutes
more
late for
detail.
the meeting that
Agreed.
would define
Let's
the
add the
next decade
projections
of his
here.
life.
Good.
The
And flag
lobby
this
of
risk.
Sterling Tower gleamed with the sterile perfection of new money. Marble imported from Carrara, glass panels from Munich, bronze fixtures cast in Florence. Every surface reflected the morning sun streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, transforming the space into a cathedral of commerce. And Marcus Sterling, 45 years old, chief executive officer, self-made billionaire, master of his universe, strode through it like a man who owned every inch of polished stone beneath his feet. Because he did. His suit was custom-tailored Armani, midnight blue, perfectly pressed. The cufflinks at his wrists had belonged to his father, William Sterling, dead now for 7 years. They were simple platinum, engraved with the Sterling Capital logo. William had worn them every day for 30 years. Marcus wore them like armor. The voice in his earpiece crackled to life. Diana Chen, his executive assistant, her tone carrying the professional edge of someone who had watched her boss run late exactly 3 times in 7 years. Mr. Sterling, the Singapore investors are already in the conference room. Mr. Chen specifically mentioned he has another appointment at noon. Marcus pressed 2 fingers to the earpiece, his stride never breaking. I'm aware, Diana. Technical difficulty with the elevator. I'll be there momentarily. Technical difficulty. That was corporate speak for the main elevator being out of service for the 3rd time this month. He'd have to fire someone over that. Later, after he closed the $60 million deal that would transform Sterling Capital Management from a national powerhouse into a global empire. The numbers scrolled through his mind like a stock ticker. Projected growth, 42% over 5 years. Market penetration across 3 continents. Strategic partnerships in Singapore, Tokyo, and Shanghai. The presentation was flawless. The projections, conservative yet impressive. The deal was done before he even walked into the room. All he had to do was show up. The executive elevator stood 20 feet ahead. Reserved for penthouse offices, reserved for him. The call button gleamed like a promise. Press it, enter. Ascend to the 52nd floor. Sign the documents. Transform his legacy. Simple. His phone buzzed. Brandon Cross, the chief operating officer. 40 years old, ambitious, always calling at the worst possible moments. Marcus answered without stopping. What is it, Brandon? Mark, the Singapore contract has a clause in Section 7 we need to review before you sign. It's about intellectual property rights. Handle it. I'm in a hurry. He ended the call, pressed the elevator button. The soft chime announced its arrival. Behind him a voice, high-pitched, desperate, cutting through the careful orchestration of his morning like a knife through silk. Wait, please don't take that elevator. Marcus turned. A child was running across the lobby, small, perhaps 12 years old. Wearing a faded blue hoodie 3 sizes too large, the kind of anonymous clothing that homeless people wore to stay invisible. Her jeans had patches at the knees. Her sneakers were worn nearly through, her dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail that suggested she'd been sleeping rough. A security guard materialized from nowhere, moving to intercept her. His hand reached for her shoulder. Marcus held up one hand. What's the meaning of this? The girl skidded to a stop 3 feet from him. She was breathing hard. Her face was dirty, but her eyes were clear and intelligent and absolutely terrified. Please, she said between breaths, don't take that elevator. It's not safe. Marcus felt his irritation spike. He had 8 minutes to make a meeting that could cost him $60 million if he missed it. And this child, this street urchin, was trying to con him with some elaborate scheme. Manhattan was full of them. Excuse me, he said. I heard the maintenance guys talking. The girl continued, words tumbling out in a rush. There's something wrong with the cable. They said it could snap any minute. Please, just take the other elevator. Marcus assessed her in 2 seconds, the way he'd been trained to assess people. Risk versus opportunity, investment versus return. The calculation was instant and merciless. Dirty clothes, unwashed face, likely homeless. Probably part of a team working the financial district. One creates a distraction while others pick pockets or steal briefcases. He'd seen it before. Young lady, I don't have time for this. Security, please escort her outside. The girl's eyes widened. She looked at the elevator doors, back at him. And in that moment, Marcus saw something he didn't expect. Not cunning, not calculation, pure, desperate certainty. She lunged forward and grabbed his briefcase with both hands. You can't! Let go! Marcus yanked back, but the girl's grip was surprisingly strong, her knuckles white with effort, her entire body weight pulling against him. This is ridiculous, he said. He pulled harder. The girl held on. Her shoes squeaked against the marble as she slid forward. Behind them, the elevator doors opened with their soft, familiar chime. The sound of arrival, of ascension, of everything proceeding exactly as planned. Marcus gave one final yank. His superior strength won. The briefcase came free, but the force of it sent him stumbling backward 2 steps. The briefcase slipped from his fingers and hit the marble floor with a crash that echoed through the lobby like a gunshot. Papers exploded outward. Quarterly reports, projection sheets, contract addendums, 7 years of work scattered across Italian marble like snow. Now look what you've done, Marcus began. And that's when the world ended. The sound came first, a metallic screech that started high and descended into a register that made every person in the lobby stop moving. It was the sound of metal tearing, of cables snapping, of gravity taking hold of 8,000 pounds of steel and glass and human engineering. The screech became a roar. The roar became a crash. The entire building shook. Windows rattled in their frames. The massive chandelier overhead swayed. Someone screamed. Then everyone was screaming. Marcus stood frozen, staring at the open elevator doors, at the empty shaft beyond, at the darkness where a floor should have been. The elevator car had plummeted, 42 floors, with enough force to shake the foundation of the building, with enough velocity to turn anyone inside into a memory. His legs felt disconnected from his body. His briefcase lay forgotten at his feet, papers still settling like leaves. His breath came in short gasps that had nothing to do with physical exertion and everything to do with the realization crashing over him like a wave. He should be dead. He should be inside that elevator. He should be 42 floors down right now, crushed and broken and gone. But he wasn't, because of her. He turned. The girl stood 5 feet away, her small chest heaving, her eyes wide with shock despite the vindication written across her face, despite being proven right in the most horrific way possible. She looked at him, at the empty shaft, back at him. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. I tried to tell you. The lobby erupted into chaos. Security guards rushing forward, building management appearing from nowhere. Diana's voice in his earpiece, frantic now, all professional composure gone. Mr. Sterling, are you all right? We heard a crash. What happened? Marcus, answer me. He pressed his finger to the earpiece. His hand was shaking. He made it stop through pure force of will. I'm fine, Diana. There's been an incident with the elevator. Call emergency services and reschedule the Singapore meeting. For when? He looked at the girl, at this child who had just saved his life, who had grabbed his briefcase and made herself a nuisance and refused to let him die. Clear my schedule for the day. The entire day? Diana's voice rose half an octave. But the Singapore investors? They're waiting. The board will want to know what happened. There are procedures we need to follow. The entire day, Diana. He ended the call. Around them, the lobby continued its descent into controlled panic. But in that moment, for Marcus Sterling, there was only silence. Only the girl. Only the realization that every certainty he'd built his life upon had just been shattered along with that elevator cable. He knelt down, started gathering the scattered papers with hands that still trembled slightly. The motion was automatic. 7 years of habit. To his surprise, the girl knelt beside him and began helping. Her small hands carefully stacking documents, treating them with a reverence that seemed out of place given her appearance. What's your name? Marcus asked. Emma, she replied, not looking up from the papers. Emma Hayes. Emma Hayes, the name meant nothing to him. Should it? Had he missed something? Failed to recognize someone important? Well, Emma Hayes, he said, his voice rough with emotions he couldn't quite identify. You just saved my life. I think that earns you breakfast, at least. He studied her face more carefully now. There was something familiar about her features, the shape of her eyes, the set of her jaw, like an echo of someone he'd known long ago. Are your parents nearby? A shadow crossed her face. Brief, but unmistakable. Just my mom. She's resting in the park across the street. Resting, the euphemism was gentle. But Marcus had spent enough time negotiating with desperate people to recognize code when he heard it. Resting meant sleeping. Sleeping in a park meant homeless. This child was homeless. This child who had just saved his life was living on the streets of Manhattan. The irony was so sharp it almost made him laugh. "Let's get her too," he said. The diner was the kind of place Marcus Sterling never entered. Too bright, too loud, too full of ordinary people living ordinary lives. But it was close, and the hostess recognized him, and within minutes they were seated in a quiet corner booth in the back where the lighting was softer and the noise of the main dining room faded to a distant hum. Marcus sat across from Emma and the woman who must be her mother, Claire Hayes. The name still meant nothing to him. But looking at her now, really looking at her for the first time, he felt that same echo of familiarity he'd experienced with Emma. Stronger now, more insistent. She was 42 perhaps, maybe 45. It was hard to tell. The kind of ageless quality that came from too much hardship weathering away the markers of youth. She was thin, painfully thin, the kind of thin that came from missing too many meals for too many months. Her clothes were layered, practical. The uniform of someone who slept outside and needed every scrap of fabric to stay warm through Manhattan nights. But her eyes were the same clear, intelligent brown as her daughter's. And when she wrapped her hands around the coffee mug the waitress had brought, she held it like it was the most precious thing in the world, like someone might take it away if she loosened her grip. "I don't understand," she said. Her voice was soft, dignified, the kind of dignity that came from having lost everything except your sense of self. "Why would you want to help us?" Marcus considered the question. Why indeed? He was Marcus Sterling. He had board meetings and merger negotiations and 1,000 demands on his time. He had just lost a $60 million deal because he was sitting in a diner instead of signing contracts. Why was he here? "Your daughter saved my life today," he said finally. "I owe her a debt." Emma was already halfway through a stack of pancakes, eating with the focused intensity of someone who didn't know when the next meal would come. She looked up when he mentioned her. "We've been staying near your building for about 3 months now," she said between bites. "The security guards let me use the bathroom sometimes when it's raining." 3 months. This child had been living on the streets near his tower for 3 months, and he'd never noticed, never seen her, never even registered her existence. How many times had he walked past her? How many times had she been invisible to him? "What happened before that?" he asked. Claire hesitated. He saw her eyes flick to Emma, some silent communication passing between mother and daughter. Then Claire sighed, the sound carrying the weight of 100 defeats. "We had an apartment in Queens. I worked as a housekeeper for several families in Manhattan. But I got sick, pneumonia. I missed too many days. We fell behind on rent." She shrugged. The gesture was small, resigned. It said everything her words didn't. It said we tried. It said we fought. It said we lost. "And your husband?" Marcus asked. "There hasn't been one for a long time." The answer was simple, final. It invited no follow-up questions. Marcus found himself studying Claire's face more intently now, that sense of familiarity growing stronger. It nagged at him like a song he couldn't quite place, a melody from his past that his conscious mind had forgotten but his subconscious still recognized. The way she held her coffee mug, the tilt of her head when she spoke, the particular shade of her eyes. He knew her. The certainty settled over him like ice water. He knew her from somewhere, from some time, from some version of his life that seemed impossibly distant from the gleaming tower and the billion-dollar deals and the Patek Philippe watch that cost more than most people made in a decade. "Have we met before, Mrs. Hayes?" Claire's eyes met his. For just a moment, something flickered in their depths. Recognition, fear, resignation. Then she looked away, back down at her coffee. "Many people ask that," she said. "I worked in a lot of homes across Manhattan. After a while, all the wealthy neighborhoods start to blend together." It was a deflection. He recognized it because he'd used the same technique 1,000 times in negotiations. Give a non-answer that sounded like an answer. Redirect, move on. But he couldn't move on, because now the memory was rising from wherever he'd buried it, clawing its way to the surface despite his mind's attempts to keep it submerged. The coffee mug. That's what triggered it. Not the mug itself, but the way she held it, the particular angle of her wrists, the way her fingers wrapped around the ceramic. He'd seen that before. Before his phone could ring again, before Diana could demand his presence at some emergency board meeting, before the world could intrude with its endless demands, Marcus leaned forward. "You're Claire," he said. His voice had dropped to barely more than a whisper. Claire Hayes, you worked for my family. The words hung in the air between them like an accusation. Claire's hands trembled, just slightly, barely noticeable. But he saw it, saw the way her knuckles went white, saw the way she had to concentrate to keep the coffee from spilling. Yes, she said finally, for almost 15 years. The restaurant noise faded, the clatter of dishes, the hum of conversation, the hiss of the coffee machine. It all became distant, irrelevant, because Marcus Sterling was no longer sitting in a diner in Manhattan in the present day. He was standing in the study of his father's house 7 years ago, the day after the funeral, the day after they'd buried William Sterling beneath a marble headstone that cost $40,000 and said absolutely nothing about the man himself. He was 28 years old and angry at the world and determined to prove he was more than just William Sterling's son, determined to show the board, the investors, the entire financial world that he could run the company better, smarter, more efficiently than his sentimental father ever had. And that meant cutting costs, streamlining operations, making hard decisions. That meant firing the household staff. That meant standing in the foyer with Claire Hayes, who had worked for his family since before he was born, who had essentially raised him after his mother left, who had been there for every important moment of his life. That meant handing her an envelope with a severance check and not meeting her eyes when he did it. "The package is generous," he'd said, his voice cold, professional. "This is business, not personal." And Claire, dignified even in her devastation, had taken the envelope and said only, "I understand, Mr. Sterling." Then she'd walked out of his life, and he'd never thought about her again, until now. Emma was staring at them both, her young face serious, trying to understand the weight of the silence that had fallen over the table. "Mom never told me she worked for you," Emma said. Marcus couldn't look away from Claire. "She was more than an employee," he said. The words felt like they were being dragged out of him. She was family. Claire's eyes finally met his again, and this time there was no deflection, no polite social barrier, just raw honesty. "Until I wasn't." The accusation was quiet, but it hit him with the force of that elevator cable snapping. His phone buzzed. Diana again. He ignored it. "What happened to the money?" he asked. "The severance was $80,000. Claire straightened her spine. Even here, even now, even homeless and desperate, and sitting across from the man who had destroyed her life, she held on to her dignity like it was the only thing she had left, which Marcus realized with growing horror it probably was. "Medical debt from my mother's cancer treatment," Claire said. Her voice was steady, factual. "Then college savings for Emma's future. The rest lasted about 3 years. The words fell like hammer blows. Marcus felt the ground shifting beneath him. The comfortable narrative he'd constructed about his life, about his choices, about who he was and what he'd done, was cracking like ice. "I didn't know you had a daughter." The truth of it cut deeper than any elaborate accusation could have. He'd worked alongside this woman for years, had eaten meals she prepared, had accepted her care and her kindness and her presence in his life, and he'd never once asked her the most basic question about who she was as a person. Never asked if she had a family, never asked what her dreams were, never asked anything that would have required him to see her as something more than a function he was paying for. "Your father knew," Claire added, and there was no cruelty in her voice, just a statement of fact that somehow made it worse. "He came to Emma's kindergarten graduation. He remembered her birthday every year." Of course, William Sterling had known. William Sterling, who Marcus had spent 7 years trying not to become, who Marcus had dismissed as too soft, too sentimental, too weak to make the hard choices necessary for business success. William Sterling had known Claire Hayes was a person, and Marcus Sterling had forgotten. His phone buzzed again, and again, the outside world demanding his attention, demanding he return to the comfortable certainty of quarterly reports and market projections and deals that could be won or lost with the right combination of aggression and calculation. But for the first time in 7 years, Marcus Sterling let the calls go unanswered. Emma, who had been quietly observing this entire exchange with an intelligence that seemed far beyond her 12 years, suddenly spoke. "Mr. Sterling, why are rich people always in such a hurry?" The question caught him completely off guard. "Excuse me? You're always rushing, you and all the other people in suits, always checking watches and phones, never looking at anything else, never seeing the world around you." It should have been an innocent observation, a child's simple question, but it landed like an indictment. Marcus opened his mouth to give some polished response about efficiency and productivity and the demands of running a billion-dollar company. The kind of answer he'd given 100 times to journalists and board members and anyone who questioned his relentless focus. Instead, he heard himself say, "I don't know, Emma. I honestly don't know anymore." And as he spoke those words, something fundamental shifted inside him, like a hairline crack appearing in the foundation of a building, barely visible, but there, growing. The certainty that had guided every decision for 7 years suddenly felt hollow. Outside the diner windows, Manhattan continued its relentless pace, people rushing past, taxis honking, the great machine of commerce grinding forward with its usual mechanical precision. But inside, in this small booth in the back corner, three people sat in a moment of unexpected connection. A wealthy businessman who had just discovered he'd been living his life wrong. A homeless woman who had every right to hate him, but somehow maintained her grace. And a 12-year-old girl who had saved his life and was now, perhaps, beginning to save his soul. Emma's words stayed with Marcus as they left the diner. Why are rich people always in such a hurry? The question echoed in his mind, bouncing off memories of the last 7 years. 7 years of running, of checking his watch, of treating every moment as a transaction to be optimized. And all that hurrying had gotten him what, exactly? A corner office? $1 billion? And the profound loneliness of having built an empire with no one to share it with. The afternoon sun was beginning its descent toward the Hudson, painting the glass towers of Manhattan in shades of amber and gold. It was the kind of light photographers loved, the kind that made even the harsh angles of the financial district look almost beautiful. Emma led them through streets Marcus thought he knew. He'd walked these blocks 1,000 times, but he'd never really seen them, not the way Emma saw them. She moved with the practiced ease of someone who'd learned to navigate hostile territory, staying close to buildings, avoiding eye contact with beat cops, steering clear of the business people who might call security if they noticed a homeless child lingering too long in one place. There are more of us than you think, Emma said as they turned down an alley behind a row of luxury retailers. Most people don't notice. We've learned to be invisible. Claire followed behind them, quiet, her earlier dignity now tinged with something that looked like shame. As if bringing Marcus into this world, showing him the reality of their lives, somehow diminished her in his eyes. It didn't. If anything, her ability to survive this, to keep Emma safe and fed and hopeful, made her stronger than anyone Marcus had ever negotiated with. The alley opened into a small courtyard that Marcus had never known existed, despite working 3 blocks away for a decade. It was formed by the backs of 4 buildings, their service entrances and loading docks creating a protected space that was technically private property, but universally ignored by building management. And there, in the shadows of billion-dollar real estate, were the children. 6 of them visible at first glance, more appearing as Marcus's eyes adjusted to the dimmer light, ranging in age from maybe 8 years old to mid-teens, sitting on cardboard, wearing layers of clothing that looked scavenged from donation boxes, some doing homework by the fading daylight, others just sitting, staring at nothing with the 1,000-yard stare of people who'd seen too much. A teenage boy noticed them first. He stood immediately, body language defensive, placing himself between Marcus and the younger children. "Emma," he said, his voice was wary, protective. "Who's this?" "Tyler, it's okay," Emma replied. "This is Mr. Sterling. He owns the big building on Fifth Avenue. He's helping us today." Tyler looked Marcus up and down, taking in the Armani suit, the expensive shoes, the Patek Philippe watch that cost more than Tyler and all these kids combined would see in a lifetime. "Helping," Tyler repeated. The word dripped with skepticism. "What does a guy like you want with kids like us?" It was a fair question, the best question, really. What did Marcus Sterling want with them? Why was he here instead of in his office, salvaging the Singapore deal, managing the board, doing all the things that supposedly mattered? "I don't know yet," Marcus said. And for once, honesty felt more powerful than any calculated response. Tyler studied him for another long moment. Then, apparently deciding Marcus wasn't an immediate threat, he relaxed slightly. "Well, you're here now. Might as well see how the other half lives." Over the next hour, Marcus met them. Really met them. Not as statistics or social problems or news stories about urban homelessness. As people. As children with names and stories and dreams that hadn't quite been crushed yet. There was Maya, 9 years old. She carried a backpack full of books, all of them worn to the point of falling apart from repeated reading. She was sitting against a wall doing homework in a battered notebook, her handwriting careful and precise. "Where do you go to school?" Marcus asked. "Public school on 42nd, Maya said without looking up from her work. "I haven't missed a day in 2 years, even when it's cold, even when we can't find a place to sleep. Because if I miss too many days, they'll send social services, and social services will put me in a foster home, and foster homes split up families." She said it matter-of-factly, just another logistical challenge to be navigated. There were twins, Sophie and Lucas, 10 years old. Their mother was in a facility somewhere fighting addiction. The twins had been in foster care briefly but ran away after 3 different placements. Better to be together on the streets than separated in the system. There was Jackson, 14. His mother was in rehab upstate. 4th attempt. He was optimistic this time would work because she'd been clean for 60 days. The longest stretch in 5 years. And there were others, each with their own story, each with their own particular tragedy that had led them to this courtyard, to this invisible community existing in the shadows of Manhattan's gleaming towers. Tyler, the teenager who challenged Marcus, was clearly the leader, 13 years old but carrying himself with the weary authority of someone much older. He'd fled an abusive foster situation 8 months ago and had been on the streets ever since. "Someone has to look out for them," Tyler said, gesturing at the younger kids. "The shelters split up families. Social services puts you in the system, and the system chews you up. At least here we stay together." Marcus watched as Emma moved among them, greeting each one, sharing the leftover food from the diner. They responded to her with genuine warmth, not just tolerating her presence, but clearly valuing it, respecting it. "Emma knows which restaurants throw out good food," Tyler explained, "and which ones just dump bleach on it to keep people away. She knows which security guards will let us use the bathroom and which ones will call the cops. She knows the city better than most adults." "Because nobody notices me," Emma added, rejoining them. "I'm just a kid. People look right through me." The words were said without self-pity, just another fact of her existence. Marcus bought them all dinner from a nearby deli, sandwiches and chips and soda. He spent $200 and felt guilty it wasn't more. Guilty that $200 was meaningless to him, less than he spent on a single business lunch. But it meant these kids wouldn't go hungry tonight. As the sun set and the shadows lengthened, Tyler pulled Marcus aside. "Look, I appreciate the food, but you should know, people like you usually show up, feel good about themselves for an hour, then disappear back to their comfortable lives. These kids have learned not to hope too much. It hurts less that way." "What if I'm not like that?" Marcus asked. Tyler's laugh was bitter, old beyond his years. "Everyone's like that, Mr. Sterling, everyone." But even as he said it, Marcus could see the tiny flicker of hope in the boy's eyes, the desperate wish to be proven wrong. As they prepared to leave, Sophie, one of the twins, approached Marcus shyly. "Mr. Sterling, do you really live in that big building, the one with the fountain in the lobby?" "Yes." "Is it nice?" Marcus thought about his penthouse, 15,000 square feet of marble and glass and imported furniture, museum-quality art on the walls. A view of Central Park that people paid millions just to glimpse. "It's very clean," he said finally. Sophie considered this. "I'd like to live somewhere clean someday." The statement was so simple, so fundamentally modest. This 10-year-old girl, living in an alley behind a loading dock, dreaming of clean. Not wealth, not luxury, just clean. Marcus felt something break inside his chest, some final barrier he'd built between himself and the rest of humanity. The barrier that made it possible to walk past suffering every day without really seeing it, without letting it touch him. That barrier was gone now, and in its place was something he hadn't felt in 7 years. Responsibility. Not the corporate responsibility he liked to talk about in shareholder meetings. Real responsibility. Personal responsibility. The kind that couldn't be delegated to a foundation or a charitable donation or a tax write-off. "Emma," he said, "how many kids are there in total around my building and the surrounding area?" Emma glanced at Tyler. Some silent communication passed between them. "Maybe 15 who are regulars," Tyler said. "More when it gets cold. When winter comes, we get kids from all over the city trying to find warm places." 15 children. 15 children living on the streets within 3 blocks of his tower, within sight of his office window, and he'd never noticed a single one. Claire had been standing quietly to the side, letting Emma show Marcus her world. Now she stepped forward. "We should go," she said softly. "We need to find a place for the night. The shelter on 28th Street fills up quickly." Her voice carried that same practiced resignation. This was just part of the routine. Another night, another search for somewhere safe to sleep. Marcus looked at his watch, the Patek Philippe that had seemed so important this morning. The watch that told him it was now 6:30 in the evening, that he'd missed the Singapore meeting, that he'd missed 3 board calls, that his phone had 47 unread messages, that his entire carefully constructed day had fallen apart, and he'd never felt better in his life. "I have a better idea," he said. The private elevator to Marcus Sterling's penthouse required a key card and a 6-digit code. Emma watched with wide eyes as the elevator doors closed, sealing them into the small space. The walls were polished brass. The floor was some kind of stone she didn't recognize. There was a small bench upholstered in leather that probably cost more than her mom had made in a year before they lost the apartment. Claire stood rigid beside her daughter, her hands clasped in front of her eyes fixed on the floor numbers climbing steadily upward. Marcus could feel her discomfort radiating like heat. This woman who had once moved through his father's house with easy familiarity was now a stranger in his world. And it was his fault, his choices, his coldness 7 years ago that had turned her from family into this tense, uncomfortable visitor. The elevator chimed softly. The doors opened directly into the penthouse. Emma gasped. The space was exactly what anyone would expect from a billionaire's Manhattan apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. Furniture that looked like it belonged in a design magazine. Art on the walls that Marcus had purchased because his decorator said they were good investments, not because they moved him in any way. Everything was white or glass or chrome. Everything was perfect. Everything was sterile. "It looks like a hotel," Emma said, her voice small in the vast space. "Do you actually live here?" Marcus looked around his home as if seeing it for the first time, seeing it the way Emma saw it. There were no photographs, no personal mementos, nothing that suggested a human being actually occupied this space, nothing that revealed anything about who Marcus Sterling was beyond his bank account. "I suppose I just sleep here," he said. Claire still stood near the elevator, frozen, her entire body language screaming discomfort. "The guest suite is down that hall," Marcus said, pointing. 2 bedrooms, private bathroom. There are clothes in the closets. They probably won't fit perfectly, but they're clean and new. I had the housekeeper stock them last month for visitors. Visitors who had never materialized because Marcus Sterling didn't have friends anymore. Just business associates and board members and people who wanted something from him. "Mr. Sterling," Claire started. Her voice was strained. "This is too much. We can't accept this kind of charity." "It's not charity," Marcus said. He paused, searching for the right word. "It's an apology. A very late, very inadequate apology." Emma was already exploring, running her hands over the back of the pristine white sofa, staring out the windows at the glittering cityscape. For a moment, she looked like what she should be. A 12-year-old girl amazed by something beautiful, not a street-smart survivor calculating exits and risks. Dinner arrived 40 minutes later. Marcus had called in an order to the Italian restaurant on the ground floor of his building. Enough food for 6 people, even though there were only 3 of them. Old habits. In his world, excess was expected. They sat at the dining table, a slab of marble that could seat 12 and had never hosted more than 2. The food was spread between them. Emma attacked it with the focused intensity of someone making up for too many missed meals. The conversation was stilted at first. Careful. Claire clearly uncomfortable accepting anything from him. Emma filling the silences with observations about the building, about the other tenants, about the small dramas she'd witnessed while living invisible in the shadows. "The woman on the 14th floor sneaks her cat in every day in a special purse," Emma said between bites of pasta. "And the man who works at the coffee shop gives away free pastries to old people when his boss isn't looking. I saw him do it 4 times this week." Marcus found himself genuinely interested. This child had been watching his building, his tenants, his world, and seeing things he'd never noticed despite walking through that lobby every single day. "How do you know all this?" he asked. Emma shrugged. "I pay attention. When you're invisible, you see everything. People don't hide things from you because they don't think you're watching." After dinner, Marcus showed them to the guest suite. Claire stood in the center of the bedroom, looking around with an expression Marcus couldn't quite read. Not gratitude, not relief. Something more complicated. Something sadder. "Why are you doing this?" she asked again. The same question from the diner. But now they were alone, Emma in the bathroom, marveling at the size of the shower, and the question carried more weight. Marcus had spent the entire day considering his answer. "Because your daughter saved my life," he said. "Because I owe you both more than I can ever repay. Because," he hesitated, then pushed forward, "because I've spent 7 years building an empire and forgetting what it was for. Forgetting that there's supposed to be a point to all of it beyond just accumulating more." "Is this payment then?" Claire asked. "Ayamasama." Still no judgment in her voice, just that quiet curiosity. "No," Marcus said. "This is awakening." After they'd gone to bed, Marcus stood in his study, phone in hand, staring at the cascade of missed calls and urgent messages. Diana had left 6 voicemails, each one more frantic than the last. The Singapore investors had walked out. The board was calling an emergency meeting. Brandon Cross was asking pointed questions about Marcus's judgment and whether he was fit to continue leading the company. 7 years ago, this would have been a disaster, a career-ending catastrophe, the kind of thing that would keep him up all night, strategizing and calculating and fighting to maintain control. Tonight, it felt distant, unimportant. He looked out his window at the Manhattan skyline. All those lights, all those buildings, all that money and power and accumulated wealth glittering against the night sky. And somewhere beneath it all, Tyler and Maya and Jackson and Sophie and Lucas and all the others were settling in for another night on the streets, finding their cardboard, huddling for warmth, hoping they'd wake up in the morning. 15 children, within sight of his office window, and he'd never seen them. Marcus picked up his phone, dialed Diana's number. She answered on the first ring, her voice tight with stress and exhaustion. "Marcus, finally, we need to talk about damage control. The Singapore deal is salvageable if we move fast, but you need to call Mr. Chen personally and explain what happened. And the board wants answers. Brandon has been making calls all afternoon. I think he's positioning himself to challenge your leadership." "Diana," Marcus interrupted, "I need you to do something for me first thing tomorrow morning." "Of course. What do you need?" "Research how to legally establish a charitable foundation. I want to know timelines, legal requirements, tax implications, everything." There was a pause, a long pause. "A foundation. For what purpose?" "Helping homeless youth, specifically in Manhattan, specifically starting with the area around our building." "Okay, that's good. Corporate social responsibility looks good for shareholders. How much were you thinking? $1 million? $2 million? $50 million? From my personal accounts." The silence on the other end was profound. "Diana, I'm here, just making sure I heard you correctly. Did you say $50 million? "Yes, and I need you to find out what permits and licenses we'd need to convert the 14th floor of Sterling Tower. The conference rooms and executive lounge. I want to turn them into temporary housing." "Housing in our office building?" "Yes. For homeless people. For homeless children and their families." Another pause. Marcus could practically hear Diana's mind racing, trying to understand what had happened to her boss in the last 12 hours. "Marcus, are you feeling all right? Should I send someone to check on you?" For the first time all day, Marcus laughed, actually laughed. The sound felt foreign in his own ears. "I'm fine, Diana, better than fine. For the first time in 7 years, I'm actually okay." He ended the call before she could protest further. Then he stood at his window and watched the city lights and thought about Emma Hayes asking why rich people were always in such a hurry. He'd spent 7 years hurrying towards something he thought mattered, toward deals and acquisitions and market dominance, toward becoming the kind of man his father never was. Cold, efficient, successful by every measure the business world recognized, and it had left him empty. But today a 12-year-old homeless girl had grabbed his briefcase and refused to let him die, had forced him to stop, to look, to see what had been invisible to him for so long. Marcus Sterling checked his watch one last time. The Patek Philippe that had cost $850,000. The watch that told him it was now 11:47 at night, that he'd missed every meeting, every call, every obligation he'd thought was so desperately important. Tomorrow he'd start building something that actually mattered. Tomorrow he'd start paying back a debt 7 years overdue. Tomorrow he'd begin the work of becoming someone worthy of the second chance a homeless child had given him. But tonight, for the first time since his father's funeral, Marcus Sterling went to bed feeling something other than the hollow satisfaction of another day survived. He felt hope. Morning came too quickly. Marcus woke at 5:30 from force of habit, his body conditioned by 7 years of pre-dawn conference calls with Tokyo and London. For a moment, lying in the darkness of his bedroom, he felt the familiar pull of his old life, the urge to check his phone, to review overnight market reports, to prepare for whatever crisis the day would bring. Then he remembered. The elevator. Emma. Claire. The promise he'd made to himself at 11:47 last night. He found them in the kitchen. Emma sitting at the island counter, legs swinging, eating cereal from a bowl that looked comically large in her small hands. Claire standing awkwardly by the coffee maker, clearly uncomfortable using his appliances despite having worked in homes like this for 15 years. "Good morning," Marcus said. Emma looked up, milk on her upper lip. "Your cereal is really fancy. It has pieces of real fruit in it." The observation made him smile. He'd never actually eaten that cereal. The housekeeper stocked it. He typically grabbed coffee on his way to the office and worked through breakfast. "You can have as much as you want," he said. Claire turned from the coffee maker. In the morning light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, he could see how exhausted she looked. Dark circles under her eyes. The kind of bone-deep weariness that came from months of sleeping rough, of never feeling truly safe. "We should talk about what happens next," Claire said. Her voice was gentle but firm. "This was a kind gesture, Mr. Sterling. But we can't stay here. It's not appropriate." "Why not?" "Because this isn't charity we can accept. Because Emma and I need to stand on our own feet. Because," she paused, searching for words, "because accepting too much help from you feels like going backward instead of forward." Marcus understood. Pride was often all that people in Claire's situation had left. Taking it away, even with the best intentions, could be more harmful than helpful. "What if it's not charity?" he said. "What if it's employment?" Claire's eyes narrowed slightly, suspicious. "What kind of employment?" "I'm establishing a foundation for homeless youth. It's going to need someone to run it, someone who understands the population we're trying to serve, someone with experience managing households and logistics and people. You're offering me a job. I'm offering you a position as director of operations. Salary commensurate with the responsibility. Benefits, housing allowance, everything above board and professional." Claire studied him for a long moment, looking for the catch, the hidden angle, the way this generous offer would eventually be used against her. "Why?" she asked. "Because you're qualified. Because you know this world from both sides now. Because Emma trusts you, and the other kids will too. And because," he hesitated, "then push forward with honesty. Because I owe you 7 years of wages and respect and basic human decency. This doesn't come close to evening the scales. But it's a start." Emma had stopped eating, was watching them both with that too-old wisdom in her young eyes. "Mom," she said quietly, "I think you should say yes." The board meeting was scheduled for 9 o'clock. Marcus arrived at 8:45 to find the conference room already full. 11 board members, all men in expensive suits, all wearing expressions ranging from concern to barely concealed hostility. Brandon Cross sat at the far end of the table. 40 years old, ambitious, always positioning himself as the heir apparent. He'd been remarkably quiet since Marcus's disappearance yesterday, which meant he'd been busy, making calls, building alliances, preparing for this moment. Thomas Ashford sat near the head of the table. 72 years old, William Sterling's oldest friend, the only person in the room who remembered when Sterling Capital was just William and a dream and a willingness to take risks that seemed insane at the time. "Gentlemen," Marcus said, taking it to CN. "I apologize for the disruption yesterday. As you've no doubt heard, there was an incident with the main elevator. No one was hurt, but it required my immediate attention." "We heard you spent the day with a homeless woman and child," Brandon said. His voice was smooth, professional, but there was an edge underneath, sharp and cutting. "In fact, we heard you're housing them in your penthouse. Is that true?" The room went very quiet. "Yes," Marcus said. "Emma Hayes saved my life yesterday. Her mother, Claire Hayes, worked for my family for 15 years. They're going through difficult circumstances. I'm helping them get back on their feet." "How noble," Brandon said, though some might question whether the CEO of a major investment firm should be making decisions based on sentiment rather than strategy. "Some might," Marcus agreed, "but I'm not here to discuss my personal housing arrangements. I'm here to inform you of a business decision I've made regarding Sterling Capital's corporate social responsibility initiatives." He opened the folder Diana had prepared, distributed copies around the table. "Let them read for 30 seconds before continuing. I'm establishing the Sterling Foundation with an initial endowment of $50 million from my personal funds. The foundation will focus on providing housing, education, and support services for homeless youth in Manhattan. Additionally, I'm converting the 14th floor of this building into temporary residential space for families in crisis. The silence was absolute. Then everyone started talking at once. $50 million? Housing in our office building? Have you lost your mind? The liability issues alone. What will our clients think? Brandon's voice cut through the case, calm, reasonable, the voice of sanity in a room gone mad. Marcus, I think we all appreciate your humanitarian impulses, but this is extreme. Perhaps we should table this discussion until you've had time to think it through more carefully. You've been through a traumatic experience. The elevator incident. It's natural to have an emotional response, but making $50 million decisions based on emotion is not how we operate. Several board members nodded, relieved that someone was saying what they were all thinking. Marcus had expected this, had known that Brandon would position himself as the voice of reason, the steady hand on the wheel while Marcus spiraled into some kind of breakdown. I appreciate your concern, Brandon, but my decision is final. The foundation is already being established. The legal paperwork is in progress. And I'm not asking for board approval because this involves my personal funds and my personal property. I'm informing you as a courtesy. And the 14th floor, another board member asked, that's company property. The building charter gives the majority shareholder discretion over common area usage. That's me. I've reviewed the legal framework with our attorneys. Everything is above board. Brandon leaned back in his chair, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth, as if Marcus had just made the mistake he'd been waiting for. Well then, Brandon said, if your mind is made up, I suppose there's nothing more to discuss. Though I do wonder what the Singapore investors will think when they hear about this, assuming we ever get another chance with them after you abandoned yesterday's meeting. The barb hit home. Marcus felt the familiar tension in his shoulders. The old instinct to fight back, to crush opposition, to prove he was stronger, smarter, more ruthless than anyone who challenged him. But that instinct had led him to fire Claire 7 years ago, had led him to walk past Emma 100 times without seeing her, had led him to build an empire of glass and steel with nothing human at its center. The Singapore deal will proceed or it won't, Marcus said. Either way, the foundation moves forward. The foundation. Thomas Ashford, who had been silent until now, suddenly spoke. I've known Marcus since he was 8 years old. I watched him grow up in his father's shadow, and I've watched him spend 7 years trying to prove he's not William Sterling, trying to be harder, colder, more efficient. The old man's voice carried surprising strength. What I'm seeing now isn't a breakdown. It's a breakthrough. William believed that profit without purpose was hollow. That business was about more than quarterly earnings. Marcus is finally understanding what his father knew all along. He looked directly at Brandon. So I'm voting in support of this initiative, and I suggest the rest of you consider whether you want to be part of a company that only takes or one that also gives back. The vote wasn't close. 7-4 in favor of Marcus's plan, Brandon and 3 allies voting against. Not enough to stop it, but enough to signal that the opposition was real and organized. After the meeting, Thomas pulled Marcus aside. Brandon's going to come after you, the old man said quietly. He's been positioning himself as your successor for 3 years. This foundation threatens that plan. Makes you look visionary while he looks greedy. He won't take it well. I can handle Brandon, Marcus said. Can you? Because handling Brandon the old way meant crushing him, removing him, destroying his career before he could threaten yours. But you're not that person anymore, are you? You're trying to be better, and being better sometimes means being vulnerable. Marcus had no answer for that. 3 weeks later, the 14th floor was ready. Marcus stood in what had been the East Wing conference room and marveled at the transformation. The long table where he'd negotiated billion-dollar deals was gone. In its place were 6 small bedroom areas, each with a dresser and privacy curtains. The space that had been cold and corporate was now warm, human, a place where people could sleep without fear. The executive lounge had become a communal kitchen and dining area. The presentation hall was now a classroom with desks and a whiteboard and shelves full of donated books. There was even a small medical office where a volunteer pediatrician would hold weekly clinics. Emma was the first to arrive. Of course she was. She'd been involved in every step of the planning, offering opinions on everything from bed placement to which books should go on the shelves. Now she walked through the space with barely contained excitement, touching everything, claiming the bed in the corner by the window. "This one's mine," she announced. "I can see the whole city from here." Tyler came next, still wary, still suspicious that this was all too good to be true and would be taken away the moment he started to believe in it. But he brought his backpack and his few possessions and accepted the bed across from Emma's. Then Maya with her beloved books. Jackson looking for his mother, who was still in rehab but doing well. The twins Sophie and Lucas, inseparable as always. And others, slowly, cautiously, like wild animals approaching food, ready to bolt at the first sign of danger. By evening, 15 children were settling into the 14th floor. 15 children who had been invisible yesterday and were visible today. Claire moved through this space with practiced efficiency, making sure everyone had clean clothes, that medications were recorded, that dietary restrictions were noted. She'd transformed from homeless mother to operations director in 3 weeks, and the role fit her like she'd been born to it. Marcus watched from the doorway. Diana had scheduled interviews with 3 major news outlets for tomorrow. The story was already generating buzz. Billionaire CEO opens heart and building to homeless youth. It was the kind of publicity money couldn't buy. But that wasn't why he'd done it. He'd done it because Emma had grabbed his briefcase and refused to let him die. Because Claire had maintained her dignity when he'd stripped away everything else. Because 15 children deserved to sleep somewhere clean. The publicity was just a side effect. Emma found him standing there, came over with that direct, unsettling way she had of looking at people. "Thank you," she said simply, 2 words. But they carried the weight of everything she'd been through, everything she'd survived, everything she was still fighting for. "You saved my life," Marcus replied. "This doesn't come close to evening the scales." "Maybe not, but it's a good start." She smiled then, a real smile. Not the careful, guarded expression she usually wore. And for a moment, Marcus saw what she might become. Given safety, given education, given the chance that every child deserved, but so few actually received, she was going to be extraordinary. The press conference was scheduled for noon. Marcus had agreed to it reluctantly, understanding that media attention would help the foundation, but dreading the performance of it all, answering questions, smiling for cameras, pretending that his motivations were pure altruism rather than complicated guilt. He arrived at the lobby to find it already crowded with reporters and cameras. Diana had done her job well. Every major outlet was represented. This would be front-page news tomorrow. But something was wrong. The reporters weren't setting up for a feel-good story. They were circling like sharks, sensing blood in the water. Marcus saw Trevor Wilson from Channel 8 immediately. The man was a tabloid journalist masquerading as a legitimate reporter, known for ambush interviews and gotcha questions designed to create controversy rather than illuminate truth. "Mr. Sterling," Wilson called out as soon as Marcus appeared, "can you comment on the allegations that this foundation is a tax shelter? That you're using homeless children as props to avoid paying your fair share?" Marcus stopped, forced himself to remain calm. "The foundation is fully transparent. All financial records will be publicly available. Every dollar is accounted for." "But the timing is interesting, isn't it? Your company just had its worst quarter in 3 years. The Singapore deal fell through. Some are saying this is a publicity stunt to distract from your failures as CEO. Some are wrong." Wilson smiled, sensing weakness. "And what about your relationship with Claire Hayes? Our research shows she was your family's housekeeper, that you fired her 7 years ago. Now she's running your foundation, living in your building. Some might call that inappropriate." The implication hung in the air like poison. Before Marcus could respond, a voice cut through from the back of the crowd. "That's enough, Trevor." Brandon Cross stepped forward, perfectly groomed, perfectly professional. The picture of corporate concern. "Mr. Sterling has been under tremendous stress lately. The elevator incident was traumatic. We're all worried about his judgment. Perhaps it would be better if he took some time away from the spotlight to recover." The trap was elegant. If Marcus defended himself, he'd look defensive. If he stayed silent, Brandon's narrative would take hold. Either way, doubt was planted. Thomas Ashford appeared at Marcus's side. The old man moved slowly but with purpose. "Gentlemen of the press," Thomas said, his voice carrying surprising authority. "I've known Marcus Sterling since he was a boy. I knew his father for 40 years. And I can tell you with absolute certainty that what you're witnessing isn't a breakdown. It's a breakthrough." He pulled out a folder, started distributing documents. These are financial records showing every transaction related to the foundation. These are testimonials from the children being helped. These are permits and licenses showing everything is legal and above board. And these, he pulled out one more document, looked directly at Brandon. These are records of stock manipulation attempts, coordinated short selling, and payments to certain journalists to create negative publicity about Sterling Capital and Mr. Sterling personally. The room went silent. The company's investigation has traced these activities back to shell companies owned by Pierce Industries, Mr. Cross's family company. Brandon's face went white. That's ridiculous. I would never. The evidence is comprehensive, Thomas continued. And as of this morning, the board has voted to suspend you pending a full investigation. Brandon's careful composure cracked. For just a moment, Marcus saw raw fury in his eyes. Then Brandon straightened, adjusted his tie. This isn't over, he said quietly. Words meant only for Marcus. Then he turned and walked out. The press conference dissolved into chaos, reporters shouting questions, cameras flashing, Diana trying to restore order and failing. But Marcus barely noticed. Because in that moment, watching Brandon's calculated plans fall apart, he felt something unexpected. Not triumph, not satisfaction, sadness. Brandon had spent 3 years positioning himself to take over Sterling Capital, had built alliances and plans and strategies, all of it crumbling because he couldn't accept that there might be more to success than accumulation. Marcus had been exactly like him 7 years ago, cold, calculating, convinced that sentiment was weakness and ruthlessness was strength. It had made him successful and empty. He wondered if Brandon would figure that out before it was too late, or if he'd spend the rest of his life chasing the wrong things and wondering why victory always felt hollow. Spring arrived in Manhattan with the sudden violence it always did. One day frozen, the next day blooming. Central Park transformed from gray to green seemingly overnight. Marcus stood at the window of his office, watching the city wake up. 6 months since Emma had saved his life. 6 months since everything changed. The Sterling Foundation now served 53 children. The 14th floor had expanded to include the 13th. A second location was opening in Brooklyn next month. 5 other cities had contacted them about replicating the model. Tyler was taking coding classes at a community college, talking about software engineering like it was actually possible. Maya had won a citywide art competition. Jackson's mother was out of rehab and working in the foundation's kitchen. The twins were thriving in an advanced math program. And Emma was applying to a competitive middle school, test scores off the charts, teachers amazed by her intelligence and determination. She'd gone from homeless and invisible to discussed as a candidate for a full scholarship to one of Manhattan's elite private schools. Claire ran the foundation with quiet efficiency. They'd hired a staff of 12, formed partnerships with hospitals and schools and social service agencies, created a model that actually worked. The Singapore investors had eventually come back, impressed by the publicity, by the vision, by the courage to do something that wasn't just about profit. The deal had closed 3 months ago on terms even more favorable than the original proposal. The board had settled into grudging acceptance. Even the members who'd opposed the foundation initially had to admit it was good for business. Applications for positions at Sterling Capital were up 40%. They were attracting the kind of idealistic young talent that wanted to work for a company with values beyond shareholder returns. Brandon Cross was gone, forced to resign. His attempt to sabotage Marcus had backfired spectacularly. Last Marcus heard, he was working for a competitor. Smaller company, smaller role, probably still plotting his return to power. Marcus's phone buzzed, a text from Claire. Emma's school acceptance letter arrived. She got in, full scholarship. He felt something warm spread through his chest, pride, joy, the kind of uncomplicated happiness he hadn't experienced in years. Another text followed. She wants to tell you herself. Dinner tonight? Marcus looked at his calendar. 3 meetings scheduled. Conference call with Tokyo. Earnings review. He canceled all of it. Typed back, I'll bring champagne, the fancy kind with real fruit in it. That evening, in his penthouse that no longer felt like a hotel, Marcus sat at the dining table with Claire and Emma. The champagne was sparkling cider for Emma, but she didn't know the difference. She was glowing with happiness, talking a mile a minute about the school and the classes and the possibilities opening up in front of her. Claire watched her daughter with an expression Marcus had learned to recognize. Love mixed with relief, mixed with the bone-deep exhaustion of a parent who'd fought impossible odds and somehow, miraculously, won. Later, after Emma had gone to bed, Marcus and Claire sat in the living room. The lights of Manhattan glittered through the windows. The city that had tried to crush them both and failed. "I have something to tell you," Claire said. Her voice was hesitant, uncertain in a way she rarely was anymore. "What is it?" "The foundation has an offer from a family in Connecticut. They want to endow a permanent facility, housing for up to 100 children, full educational support, medical care, everything we've been trying to do, but with real resources." "That's incredible," Marcus said. "It is, but there's a condition. They want me to relocate there, to run the new facility full-time. It's a 5-year commitment." Marcus felt something twist in his chest, losing Claire, losing Emma. The thought was more painful than he'd expected. "What did you tell them?" "That I needed to think about it, that I needed to talk to you first." She looked at him directly, that same clear-eyed honesty she'd always had. "These 6 months, working with you, rebuilding the foundation together, it's been good, better than good. And I think there could be more, if we both wanted it." The admission hung between them, fragile and honest and terrifying. Marcus had built walls around himself for 7 years, had convinced himself he was better off alone, that relationships were distractions, that love was a weakness he couldn't afford. But those walls had crumbled the moment Emma grabbed his briefcase. "I want it," he said quietly. "I want more. With you, with Emma, with whatever this becomes." Wendell Claire smiled, the real smile she saved for moments when her guard was completely down. "Then I'm staying," she said. "Connecticut can find someone else. My family is here now." Outside, Manhattan continued its endless rhythm, millions of people rushing through their lives, building empires and losing fortunes and searching for meaning in the spaces between. But here, in this moment, Marcus Sterling had found something more valuable than any deal he'd ever closed. He'd found purpose, connection, love. He'd found home. And it had all started with 42 seconds and a 12-year-old girl who refused to let a stranger die. The anniversary fell on a Tuesday. Marcus woke at dawn, as he always did now, but instead of reaching for his phone to check overnight markets, he lay still and listened to the sounds of his home coming to life. Water running in the guest suite where Claire and Emma still lived, though calling it the guest suite felt absurd now. It was their home as much as his, maybe more. Coffee brewing in the kitchen. Emma's voice pitched low to avoid waking him, talking to her mother about a history project due next week. Normal sounds, domestic sounds, the kind of sounds that would have felt suffocating to him 2 years ago. Now they felt like peace. He found them at the kitchen island. Emma hunched over her laptop, typing furiously. Claire standing behind her, reading over her shoulder, offering quiet suggestions. They both looked up when he entered. "Good morning," Claire said. She smiled. The real smile that still made something warm bloom in his chest every time he saw it. "Morning," he added without looking away from her screen. "Did you know that the Great Depression lasted 10 years? Like a whole decade of everyone being poor? How did people even survive that?" "Community," Marcus said, pouring himself coffee. "Mutual aid, people helping each other because they had to." Emma considered this, then nodded and went back to typing. Marcus watched her for a moment. She'd grown in the past year. Not just physically, though she'd shot up 3 inches and finally grown into that oversized hoodie she'd been wearing the day they met, but grown in confidence, in self-assurance, in the quiet certainty that she belonged in the world and had every right to take up space in it. The transformation was remarkable. "What time is the ceremony?" Claire asked. 2 o'clock. "Diana's been planning it for weeks. I think she's invited half of Manhattan." The anniversary celebration for the Sterling Foundation, 1 year since they had opened the doors on the 14th floor. 1 year since 15 invisible children had become visible. The foundation now served 87 children across 3 locations in Manhattan and 1 in Brooklyn. They'd established partnerships with 12 schools, 6 hospitals, and countless social service agencies. The model was being studied by nonprofits across the country, and it had all started because a 12-year-old girl had refused to let a stranger die. "Are you nervous?" Emma asked. She was watching him now, her homework temporarily forgotten. That too perceptive gaze that saw more than most adults. "A little," Marcus admitted. "Why, you've done amazing things. The foundation is helping so many people." "Because a year ago, I didn't know what I was doing. I just knew I had to do something. Now there are expectations. People looking to us as a model. What if we mess it up?" Emma closed her laptop, gave him her full attention. Mr. Sterling, you taught me something important. You know what it was? What? That trying and failing is better than not trying at all. A year ago, Tyler and Maya and Jackson and me, we were invisible. Now we're not. Even if the foundation disappeared tomorrow, you can't make us invisible again. We exist now. We matter now. That's because you tried. 13 years old and already wiser than he'd been at 40. When did you get so smart? He asked. Emma grinned. I was always smart. You just started paying attention. The Sterling Tower lobby had been transformed, white and gold decorations everywhere. A banner stretched across the entrance reading, 1 year of hope. Television cameras from 3 networks, photographers from major newspapers. The mayor was coming. 2 senators. A constellation of Manhattan's wealthy and powerful, all eager to be associated with the year's most celebrated philanthropic success story. Marcus hated every minute of it. Not the success, not the recognition for the foundation, but the performance of it all. The smiling for cameras, the sound bites, the reduction of complex human stories into digestible narratives for the evening news. But this wasn't about him. It was about the children, about showing the world that these kids mattered, that investing in them produced returns that couldn't be measured in quarterly earnings, but were infinitely more valuable. So he smiled, shook hands, gave interviews. Mr. Sterling, what inspired you to start the foundation? The same question he'd been asked 100 times. He could give them the polished answer, the one Diana had crafted about corporate responsibility and giving back to the community. Instead, he told the truth. A 12-year-old homeless girl saved my life. Then she showed me a world I'd been walking past for years without seeing it. The foundation exists because Emma Hayes refused to let me stay blind. The reporter blinked, clearly expecting something more conventional. And where is Emma now? She's right there. Marcus pointed to the far side of the lobby where Emma stood with a group of other foundation kids. They were all dressed up, all looking uncomfortable in formal clothes but trying their best. Maya had a new dress. Tyler wore a suit that actually fit. Jackson stood with his mother, both of them beaming. The camera swung to capture them, and Marcus saw the moment when the reporter's expression shifted. When this stopped being just another story about a wealthy CEO's charity project and became something real. These were children. Real children with real lives and real futures that were fundamentally different because someone had bothered to care. The ceremony itself was held in the renovated 14th floor. 200 people crammed into the space that had once been sterile conference rooms and was now undeniably, unmistakably a home. The mayor spoke, said nice things about public-private partnerships and the importance of addressing youth homelessness. It was a good speech, probably written by someone on his staff who actually believed in the cause. Thomas Ashford spoke next. The old man's voice was thinner than it had been a year ago. He'd been sick recently. Nothing serious, he insisted, though Marcus worried. But today Thomas stood straight and spoke with the moral authority of someone who'd spent 70 years building a reputation for integrity. William Sterling believed that we are judged not by what we accumulate, but by what we give away, Thomas said. His son has finally learned that lesson. And in learning it, he has honored his father's memory more than any business success ever could. Then it was Marcus's turn. He stood at the podium and looked out at the assembled crowd, politicians and philanthropists in the back, foundation staff in the middle, and in the front row, sitting together, the children who had been invisible a year ago. He'd prepared remarks. Diana had written them. They were good, inspiring, exactly what the moment called for. He ignored them completely. A year ago, I was running late for a meeting, Marcus began. The most important meeting of my career. $60 million on the line. Everything I'd worked for coming down to one perfect presentation. I was so focused on that meeting that I almost walked into an elevator that would have killed me. The room was absolutely silent. Emma Hayes saved my life that day, but what I didn't understand then was that she didn't just save me from dying. She saved me from the slow death I'd been living for 7 years. The death of purpose, of connection, of meaning. He looked directly at Emma. This foundation exists because Emma refused to let me be blind. Because she and the other children living on our streets are not invisible. They're not statistics. They're not problems to be managed. They're human beings with talents and dreams and potential that our society has been wasting. His voice grew stronger. We've helped 87 children this year. 87 futures that look different now. But there are thousands more out there, still invisible, still waiting for someone to see them. This foundation is just the beginning. We're going to keep growing, keep fighting, keep refusing to accept that any child should sleep on the streets of the wealthiest city in the wealthiest nation on earth. He paused, let the words settle. So yes, today we celebrate what we've accomplished. But tomorrow we get back to work, because 87 isn't enough. It won't be enough until every child has a safe place to sleep and a real chance at the future they deserve. The applause started slowly, then built, then became thunderous. But Marcus wasn't listening to the applause. He was watching Emma, watching the tears streaming down her face, watching her mouth the words "thank you" across the crowded room. That was worth more than any standing ovation. Scene 10, the cost of change. The party continued for hours. Marcus shook hands until his arm ached, smiled until his face hurt, answered the same questions over and over with the patience Diana had drilled into him. It was nearly 7 before the last guest left. Marcus stood in the empty 14th floor, surrounded by the debris of celebration. Champagne glasses everywhere, plates of half-eaten catering, the banner sagging slightly where one corner had come loose from the wall. He heard footsteps behind him, knew without turning that it was Claire. "You did well today," she said, coming to stand beside him. "I talked too long. Diana's going to kill me for going off script." "You spoke from the heart. That matters more than staying on message." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. Over the past year, they'd developed this, the ability to be together without needing to fill every moment with words. It was one of the things Marcus valued most about their relationship, because it was a relationship now. They'd been careful about it, slow. Neither of them wanted to rush into something that could damage the foundation or hurt Emma. But somewhere between running the foundation together and sharing coffee in the mornings and late-night strategy sessions about expansion plans, friendship had become something deeper. "I have something to tell you," Claire said. Her voice carried an edge of nervousness that made Marcus's chest tighten. "What is it?" "I got an offer today from a university in California. They're starting a new program in social work focused on youth homelessness. They want me to help design the curriculum and teach. It's a 3-year appointment, tenure track after that if it works out." Marcus felt the words like a physical blow. California, the 3,000 miles away. "That's incredible," he managed. "You'd be amazing at that." "I haven't said yes yet." "Why not?" Claire turned to look at him directly. "Because my life is here now. The foundation is here. Emma's school is here. You're here." The last 2 words hung in the air between them. "You should take it," Marcus said, even though every fiber of his being wanted to beg her to stay. "It's an incredible opportunity. You deserve it." "What do you want, Marcus?" The question was simple. The answer was anything but. What did he want? A year ago, he would have said he wanted success, power, the respect of his peers and the fear of his competitors. Things that could be measured and quantified and displayed like trophies. Now those things felt hollow. Now what he wanted was to wake up to the sound of Emma and Claire in his kitchen, to build something that mattered with someone who understood why it mattered, to have a partner in the truest sense of the word. "I want you to stay," he said quietly. "But not if staying means giving up your dreams. Not if you'd resent me for it later." Claire smiled, that particular smile that said she'd been hoping he'd say exactly that. "What if we compromise?" "How?" "I take the job, but I commute. Fly out to California 1 week a month to teach intensive seminars. Design the curriculum from here. They've agreed to make it work if I want it to." "And Emma?" "Emma's in the best school she's ever attended. She has friends, stability. She needs that more than she needs me to chase a job across the country." Marcus felt relief wash over him like a wave. "Are you sure?" "I've spent the last year learning something important," Claire said. "Success isn't about how far you can climb or how much you can achieve on your own. It's about building something meaningful with people you love. This foundation, this work, this life we're creating. That's my success. Everything else is just details." She stepped closer. Close enough that he could smell her shampoo, something simple and clean that reminded him of the first morning she'd stayed in his penthouse. "I love you, Marcus Sterling. I think I've loved you since you knelt down to help Emma pick up your scattered papers. Since you chose kindness over efficiency. Since you proved that people can change." He kissed her. Not the careful, tentative kiss of 2 people still figuring out what they meant to each other, but the deep, certain kiss of 2 people who'd found something worth fighting for. When they broke apart, Claire was smiling. "So I'm staying," she said. "I'm very glad." From the doorway, a voice called out, "Finally, I was wondering when you two would figure it out." They turned to find Emma standing there, grinning like she'd just won the lottery. "How long have you been there?" Claire asked. "Long enough to hear Mom say she loves you, which, by the way, I already knew. You're both terrible at hiding it." Emma walked over to them, looked up at Marcus with that serious expression she got when she was about to say something important. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. If you and Mom get married, does that make you my dad?" The question caught Marcus completely off guard. He looked at Claire, who seemed equally surprised. "I mean, I know you're not my biological father," Emma continued, "but you've been more of a dad to me this year than any guy who just donated sperm could ever be. So I was thinking maybe it counts?" Marcus knelt down so he was at eye level with her. "Emma Hayes, it would be the greatest honor of my life to be your father. Biology has nothing to do with it. Family is about choosing to love someone, about showing up, about refusing to let them be invisible." Emma threw her arms around his neck. "Good, because I already started telling people at school that you're my dad anyway." Over Emma's shoulder, Marcus saw Claire wiping tears from her eyes. This, this was what he'd been searching for without knowing it. Not success, not wealth, not the respect of the business world. Family. Scene 11, The Unexpected Visitor. 3 months later, on a gray November morning, Diana called Marcus into her office with unusual urgency. "We have a situation," she said. Marcus had learned that Diana's situations ranged from minor scheduling conflicts to existential crises. Her tone suggested this was closer to the latter. "What kind of situation?" "Brandon Cross is downstairs. He's asking to see you." Marcus felt his shoulders tense. Brandon had been gone for over a year, fired, disgraced. Last Marcus heard, he'd moved to Chicago and taken a position with a smaller investment firm, a significant step down from where he'd been at Sterling Capital. What does he want? He wouldn't say, just that it's important and personal. Marcus considered refusing. He had no obligation to Brandon, no reason to dredge up old conflicts. But curiosity won out. He found Brandon in the lobby, standing near the fountain. The man looked different, thinner, older. The aggressive confidence that had defined him was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like humility. "Marcus," Brandon said, "thank you for seeing me." "What do you want, Brandon?" "To apologize." Of all the things Marcus had expected, that wasn't on the list. Brandon gestured to a quiet corner away from the midday foot traffic. They sat in chairs that cost more than most people's monthly rent, surrounded by the marble and glass and bronze that represented everything Brandon had lost. "I've spent the last year thinking about what happened," Brandon began. "About how I sabotaged you. How I let my ambition turn me into someone I didn't recognize." He paused, gathering courage. "My therapist says I was projecting, that I saw in you everything I was afraid of becoming. You had it all. Power, success, your father's legacy, and it terrified me that you were willing to risk it for something as intangible as doing the right thing." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I saw the anniversary coverage, saw what the foundation has become, saw those kids and realized something important." Brandon met Marcus's eyes. "I spent 3 years trying to take your job, convinced that being CEO of Sterling Capital was the only thing that mattered. And when I lost it, I thought my life was over. But it wasn't. It was just different." He pulled out his phone, showed Marcus a photo of a young boy, maybe 6 years old, with bright eyes and a gap-toothed smile. "This is David. I've been mentoring him through a program in Chicago. Kid's brilliant, reads at a ninth-grade level, wants to be an astronaut, lives in a shelter with his mom." Brandon's voice grew thick with emotion. "A year ago, I would have walked past him without seeing him, just like you walked past Emma. But watching what you built, seeing how you changed, it made me realize I could change too." Marcus studied the man across from him, looking for deception, for the angle, for whatever Brandon was really after. But all he saw was genuine remorse. "I'm not asking for my job back," Brandon continued. "I'm not asking for anything except forgiveness. I was wrong about you, about what matters, about everything, and I needed you to know that." The old Marcus would have taken satisfaction in this moment, would have enjoyed watching his former rival humbled and defeated, would have accepted the apology with cold grace and sent Brandon on his way. But the old Marcus had died in that elevator shaft. "I forgive you," Marcus said. "And I'm glad you found David. He's lucky to have you." "I'm the lucky one." Brandon stood, extended his hand. "Thank you for everything, for showing me there's more to life than climbing." They shook hands, and in that moment, Marcus felt the last piece of his old life finally release its grip. The man he'd been no longer existed. The man he was becoming had room for forgiveness. The call came at dawn on a Tuesday in April. Thomas Ashford had died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 77. Heart failure. Sudden but not unexpected, given his health struggles over the past year. Marcus took the news sitting at his kitchen table, Claire's hand on his shoulder, feeling the weight of losing the last connection to his father's generation. The funeral was held on a perfect spring day, the kind of day Thomas would have loved. Cherry blossoms in bloom, sky impossibly blue. The church packed with everyone Thomas had touched in his 77 years. Marcus delivered the eulogy. Thomas Ashford taught me many things, he said from the pulpit. How to read a balance sheet, how to negotiate a contract, how to build a company that would last. But the most important thing he taught me was this. Success without integrity is just accumulation. What matters is not what you take, but what you give. Not what you build for yourself, but what you build for others. He looked out at the assembled mourners. Thomas spent his life proving that you can be as successful in business and still maintain your humanity. That profit and purpose aren't opposing forces. That the measure of a life is not in the trophies you collect, but in the lives you touch. His voice grew stronger. The Sterling Foundation exists because Thomas believed in it, because he stood up when others wanted to tear it down, because he understood that helping 87 children, or 800, or 8,000, is worth more than any quarterly earnings report. He paused, let the words settle. Thomas Ashford was the best of us, and the best way to honor him is to keep building, keep fighting, keep refusing to accept a world where success and compassion are mutually exclusive. After the service, Marcus stood in the cemetery as Thomas was lowered into the ground. Claire beside him. Emma on his other side, now 17 years old and preparing for college, already accepted to 5 universities with full scholarships. He was a good man, Emma said quietly. The best. Will you be like him when you're old? Marcus considered the question. At 50, 5 years after Emma had saved his life, he was feeling the first hints of age. Gray at his temples, reading glasses he refused to wear in public. The understanding that time was finite and each day mattered more than the last. I'm trying, he said. Every day I'm trying. The foundation had grown beyond anything Marcus had imagined that first day when he'd promised Diana he needed $50 million. They now operated 17 locations across 6 cities, served over 2,000 children annually, had a staff of 200, had inspired dozens of similar programs nationwide. Tyler was 23 now, software engineer at a major tech company. He'd stayed involved with the foundation, teaching coding classes to current residents every Saturday. Maya had gotten her art degree, was making a living as an illustrator while working on her first graphic novel. She credited the foundation with saving her life. Jackson was in nursing school, following in his mother's footsteps. Both of them sober, both of them thriving. The twins, Sophie and Lucas, were at MIT studying mathematics. Brilliant, driven, determined to use their gifts to help others the way they'd been helped. And Emma. Emma was going to Princeton in the fall, planning to study social policy and economics, already talking about coming back to run the foundation someday. You created something that will outlast you, Claire said as they walked back to the car. That's legacy. Marcus thought about that. About legacy, about what he'd leave behind when his own time came. A year ago, his legacy would have been Sterling Capital, a successful company that made wealthy people wealthier. Not nothing, but not enough. Now his legacy was 2,000 children who had been invisible and were visible, who had been lost and were found, who had been told they didn't matter and had learned that they did. That was worth more than all the quarterly earnings in the world. 10 years after Emma Hayes saved Marcus Sterling's life, the Sterling Foundation held its anniversary gala at the Museum of Natural History. 500 guests, black tie, the kind of event that raised millions in a single night. Marcus stood near the dinosaur exhibit, watching the wealthy and powerful of Manhattan mingle and network and write checks. It still felt surreal sometimes, that this world existed because a 12-year-old girl had grabbed his briefcase. Dad? He turned. Emma stood behind him in an elegant black dress, home from Princeton for the weekend. 22 years old now, poised, confident, every inch the young woman he'd known she'd become. She'd started calling him Dad 4 years ago. It still made his heart swell every time he heard it. They want you on stage in 5 minutes, she said. I know, I'm procrastinating. Emma laughed. You never procrastinate. I do when it involves giving speeches in front of 500 people. You'll be great. You always are. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the party swirl around them. In the crowd, Marcus could see Claire talking to a senator about expanding foundation programs, Tyler demonstrating his latest app to a group of tech investors, Maya's artwork on display along the far wall, pieces selling for thousands of dollars each. Can I tell you something? Emma asked. Always. Sometimes I think about that day, when I grabbed your briefcase. When the elevator fell, I think about what would have happened if I'd been too scared to say something, if I just let you walk in there and die. But you didn't. I know, but I could have. It would have been easier, safer. Nobody would have blamed me for staying invisible. She turned to look at him. You changed my life that day, but I changed yours too. We saved each other, and then we saved 2,000 other people together. That's pretty amazing. Marcus felt his eyes sting with tears he refused to let fall. You were always going to be extraordinary, Emma. I just gave you the opportunity to show it. No, you gave me the opportunity to believe it. There's a difference. Diana appeared at Marcus's elbow. Time to go on. Marcus nodded, squeezed Emma's hand once, then walked toward the stage. The crowd quieted as he approached the podium. 2,000 faces looking up at him, waiting to hear what wisdom he'd accumulated in 10 years of running the most successful youth homeless foundation in the country. He thought about all the speeches he'd given, all the carefully crafted messages Diana had written, all the polished phrases designed to inspire donations and good press. Instead, he told them the truth. 10 years ago, I was running late for a meeting, the most important meeting of my career. I was so focused on success that I almost walked into an elevator that would have killed me. A 12-year-old homeless girl saved my life that day. But more importantly, she taught me to see. He paused. Let the room settle into complete silence. We live in a city of 8 million people. Thousands of them are children sleeping on streets tonight, going hungry tonight, being invisible tonight, and most of us walk past them every single day without seeing them, not because we're cruel, but because we've trained ourselves not to look. His voice grew stronger. Emma Hayes forced me to look, and what I saw changed everything. I saw brilliant children, talented children, children with so much potential that we as a society were wasting. And I realized that the greatest sin isn't failing to help. It's failing to see that help is needed. He looked out at the assembled wealth and power. Tonight, we're celebrating 10 years of the Sterling Foundation. 2,000 children served. Countless lives changed. It's a remarkable achievement. But it's not enough, because tomorrow more children will be on our streets. More potential will be wasted. More lives will be lost to a system that has decided some people don't matter. He let the words land. So yes, tonight we celebrate. But tomorrow we keep working. We keep fighting. We keep refusing to accept that any child should be invisible. Because Emma Hayes taught me something crucial. Everyone matters. Every single person has value. And our job is not to save them. It's to see them. The rest follows naturally. The applause started slowly, then built, then thundered through the museum until the dinosaur bones themselves seemed to shake. But Marcus wasn't listening to the applause. He was looking at Emma, at Claire, at Tyler and Maya and all the others whose lives had intersected with his because of 42 seconds and a girl who refused to stay silent. They were his real legacy, not the buildings or the endowments or the programs. Them. Later that night, after the gala ended and the last donor had written their check and the museum had returned to silence, Marcus stood once more near the dinosaur exhibit. Emma found him there. What are you thinking about? She asked. That day, in the lobby, when you grabbed my briefcase. Do you wish it had never happened? That you'd just taken the other elevator and gone to your meeting? Marcus considered the question. Really considered it. If he'd taken the other elevator, he'd probably be CEO of a global investment empire by now. Richer than he was, more powerful, more successful by every conventional measure. But he wouldn't have Emma, wouldn't have Claire, wouldn't have this family he'd built from the wreckage of his old life, wouldn't have purpose. Not for a second, he said. That elevator falling was the best thing that ever happened to me. Emma smiled, that same smile she'd given him 10 years ago, when she'd whispered, I tried to tell you. Good, because I'd do it again, every single time. They walked out of the museum together, father and daughter, not by biology but by choice, by love, by the refusal to let each other be invisible. Outside, Manhattan glittered in the spring night. 8 million people living their lives, building their dreams, fighting their battles, and somewhere in that vast city, there were children sleeping on streets who would wake up tomorrow still invisible. But not for long, because Emma Hayes had taught Marcus Sterling to see. And once you learned to see, you could never go back to being blind. The work would continue, the fight would go on, and every child would matter. That was the promise Marcus Sterling had made 10 years ago when he'd knelt on a marble floor and helped a homeless girl pick up scattered papers. It was a promise he intended to keep forever. The end.